Hi, Johnny. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, good morning.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good as well and looking to learn a lot from your SecOps and also varied background. Before we start, Johnny, for the listeners, could you give a brief overview of your journey to this point?
Yeah, absolutely. So, funny enough, I actually went to college to be a pilot,
Yeah.
and quickly learned that that wasn't the route for me. So, ended up transitioning into IT. So, I've been in
Mhm.
IT now for about 18 years. Uh, Started off just as a tier one system administrator for a private company, kind of learning the ropes. And then decided to move into the managed services space because I thought
Mhm.
that was a better learning experience because you then get access to work on many different types of environments. Um, Stayed there for a little bit, and then I was lucky enough in 2013 to fall into the cloud space. There was a startup company that I worked for that started working with AWS, and I thought that was the next. The future wave of where everybody was moving.
Mm.
So decided to move there in 2016, I started working on my security journey. As I was working on these client environments, I noticed that security was kind of an afterthought. So I decided to start really concentrating on that and helping fix those issues. So in 2016, I was lucky enough to go and get my CCSK.
Mm.
Cloud certificate, certificate of cloud security knowledge from the CSA. And after I obtained that certification, I moved into management because I also noticed that there was kind of a lack in security management out there, and really started concentrating on my security journey. So in 2020, I obtained my CISSP, and I've kind of been doing it ever since.
So I'm actually curious. In 2013, was had cloud already taken over in the US? Because in APAC, it was just about getting there. How was it
Yeah,
in the
it
US?
yeah it had just started. So I think it was around like 2010 where
Mm.
that's when everybody had started talking about it, but everybody was a bit cautious of moving to it. So 2013, I think, is when um, we had a bunch of clients actually that wanted to start using cloud as a hybrid model.
Mm.
Um, so I think that's here, at least in the States, when it really started to take off.
Interesting. And just going through your journey, was it something like you started with ops, then moved into security, then moved into management? Is that the roadmap you followed?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ops out there now, right?
Mm.
So, there's always been this disparate between operations, security, networking. So, over the last couple of years, there's been NetOps and DevOps, and SecOps is kind of that next iteration of what's going on. So, yeah, I started off just doing system administration type of work,
Mm.
sitting at a keyboard and punching in commands, and then working in GUI interfaces on infrastructure. So, actually, I moved more into management before security. Once I
Mm.
actually got into management, I was able to concentrate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so too many ops floating around. So
Yeah.
let's focus on the key one, SecOps. From a 10,000 foot, how does one understand SecOps? And actually, if since you've been in cloud for quite some time, how would you look at the germination of this term? How did this come about?
Yeah, I think this, really came from just we needed a collaboration between security and operations. Uh, Security has always been an afterthought
Mm.
in my book when it comes to creating new architecture development. Um, Especially right now, I feel that ingenuity is surpassing security.
Mm.
A lot of companies out there are really trying to get an MVP product out there as quickly as possible so that they can make money, which everybody understands you want to make money, but at the
Mm.
same time they're not spending the amount of time to actually secure their environments, which is a bad thing. So I think that's where it really came from is, there was disparate tool sets between security operations developers. So we really wanted to kind of marry those departments together and bring security to the forefront at the beginning of development operations architecture. Really limit the conflicting efforts and the tool sets, and increase the
Mm.
time to resolve for incidents as well. So, um, if you start doing that, security becomes proactive at that point, and you start involving it at the beginning of projects.
Mm. And are we also talking to largely different stakeholders when we I mean, earlier when we were talking about ops and security, and then we combine SecOps. So there is a the intention is to combine the teams. But prior to this, were these discussions happening with different stakeholders with different priorities, and hence conflict was a byproduct?
Yeah, and I think that's a big issue with a bunch of companies is communication.
Mm,
There's always been these silos between these different departments. The developers decide that they want to build a product, and then they need to go to the architecting team, and then they go to the security team. So what SecOps, I think, was really trying to do is bring that together. You have individuals that have both the operations side of the house, maybe a little bit of development, but
mm.
really concentrating on security. So during those initial conversations, uh, you can really get in there and give advice on where we should be going.
Yeah. So before we come to the communication aspect of SecOps, there is an, I mean, there was obviously an inherent differentiation in priorities, right? So ops would look after performance and efficiency, and SecOps would be, or security would be looking at something on the security domain. Both of them have definitely different KPIs or measurables. So how do these two merge when we talk of SecOps? Who is gaining priority? Where is this headed?
Yeah, uh, that's a great question. Everybody has their own metrics and KPIs that they need to go
Mm,
after, and I think SecOps is really, they're really thinking about overall just security in general. Um, you know, some KPIs that come to mind are like mean time to resolution. I think that's
mm,
a big one. If a security incident happens, how quickly are you able to uh, actually determine that there is an incident, and then how quickly are you able to resolve that incident? And in
mm,
the past, it goes back to those silos, right? So developers decide that they want to push code, and they decide to push code without letting somebody know, and then all of a sudden there's an alert
mm,
that comes through and nobody knows what's going on. So what SecOps is really trying to do is using idle best practices as well. So using incident management, problem management, change management, making sure that everyone is aware of what's going on within the environment at any point in time, so that we can quickly resolve an issue, or at the same time
mm,
proactively find an issue before something happens, especially with architecture or pushing development code as well. So um, for as an example, with architecture, getting a meeting and somebody starts whiteboarding something, um, and they start talking about, we need these types of ports open so that we can have access to our environment, and then quickly
mm.
being able to say, well, actually, that's very broad. We need to narrow that down.
Yeah. So I actually want to talk a little bit about the structure of this SecOps team. But before we do that, the point which you mentioned was communication. Right? It was failing earlier, and one of the key objectives of SecOps is to get everybody on the same table. So, in your experience, what has fostered a good communication between different teams, and what have been some roadblocks, just from your own experience managing?
Management, to be perfectly honest, I that was another reason that I went into management. Is I worked
Mm,
for a bunch of I don't want to say bad managers, but not very knowledgeable managers when it came
mm,
to just communication, security, operations. So I really wanted to be that person to foster those relationship between other departments. Anytime I was working on a project myself, it was very hard for me to reach out to different peers or different departments to get the answers that I needed, and that was very frustrating. So I wanted
mm,
to get in there and start opening up those channels. So um, just building relationships with the other departments and letting them know that everything's going to be okay. I think security always has this stigma that if you do something bad, you're going to get a ruler to the wrist, and you can't have that, because the second people start fearing security um, is when they start doing things that are bad for the company,
mm,
because as a security professional, you need to be the one that's setting the tone. They always talk about security is everybody's responsibility, which is completely true. But at the same time, um, you know, I don't know what I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. So you need to really be able to be knowledgeable about that, and um, express your opinions, and just not be afraid to break down those walls.
Yeah, and also the moment people start being afraid of the security team, they start simply hiding stuff. So they are still doing what are bad practices. You just don't know about them.
Exactly, and I mean that really ties into big things right now around like phishing and social engineering. Somebody clicks on a link and immediately they're like, "Oh no, I did something really bad," and it's
Mm,
almost like being a kid again. You don't want to tell your parents about it because you're going to get yelled at, and I think that's always in the past that's kind of been with the security teams is nobody wanted to tell somebody about that, and so you really need to have those relationships with the departments. Be like, hey, this happens. And in this day and age, for sure, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that this is going to happen. So,
mm,
uh, you know, being able to be approachable and just, the quicker that I know about something, the quicker I can help fix it. So it is, I think it's all about relationships right now.
mm. True. And just coming to your point about doing something bad and not telling, when it comes to security in general, right? So some part of it is preventative in nature, some part of it would be remediative in nature. Is that something you look at it from the top? That how much of it we are spending time in preventing something bad happens, and how much of it we are spending to make sure that if something bad happens, how do we resolve it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, those are two chapters in the same book, in my opinion. I mean, you need to spend a lot of time obviously on working on being proactive. I think that's the first thing that you need to do is make
Mm,
sure that you've got all your attack vectors and attack services figured out, which goes back to communication. You need to know what's out there.
mm,
And once you've got pieces in place, then yes, you need to have some sort of processes and procedures in place. So when something bad does happen, how do you
mm,
actually fix that in a reasonable time? And that goes back to that mean time to resolution KPI that we love to talk about in SecOps as well.
mm,
Is when something happens, how quickly can we resolve it? Who do we need to involve? So um, one of the non-pretty sides of SecOps is all the policies and procedures that you get to write. But
mm,
at the end of the day, it really helps your job as well. So, during an actual like either security incident or a severity one incident in general, you have a checklist of what you need to run down to do because there are a lot of things that you need to do.
mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, I would also be interested to know, again, in your experience, if you had to create the perfect SecOps team, who would be what skill sets would be there? What designations would be there? I mean, broadly, what would be the structure here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in the name. It's security and operations system administrators. So if you think about it, back in the day, security was really VPNs and firewalls, and
Mm,
now it's DNS and detection and response, anti-phishing, data discovery, compliance, all that
mm,
stuff. So a good background in system administration so that you understand architecture, maybe a little bit of a development. You don't have to have a lot because, you've got really smart developers out there, but um, and just understanding tool sets, that's another big thing as well. There's so many different tool sets out there right now, and I swear there's 10 a day. So being able to quickly learn about new tool sets and consolidate tool sets as well, that's one thing that I've spent a lot of time on is when I get in somewhere is looking around the different departments and what tool sets they have and being able to quickly determine, okay, well, we're using this over here and this over here. Why can't we consolidate this, save money, save time? So I mean, to go back to the original question, a good background in just architecture, system administration, and then a concentration on security.
right. I mean, so you mentioning consolidation of software solution, that is a trend which we are looking at in I mean, in almost all domains. There are simply too many tools out there. And apart from saving money, I think they just increase the complexity. Now you have to train people on different tool sets, and maybe you're using all the right features, maybe you're simply putting it on and nothing is happening. But apart from this consolidation, if we look at the future of SecOps, how do you see it evolving over the coming years? And I would just segment this question into two parts. One is in the context of cloud. How do you see it evolving? And the second would be in the context of automation. So in both of these contexts, how do you see the trends in SecOps in future?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I like to say is secure all the things.
Mm-hmm.
um, Again, I keep saying it. Security is an afterthought, and ingenuity is surpassing security. And the future of SecOps is involving security and operations at the beginning of these projects, working closely with developers and architects, using tool sets as well. As I mentioned, there's a ton of attack vectors right now, so it's hard to manage them all. Um, Configuration management is another big one. Being understanding what's currently out there and what's changing. Uh, a lot of I think the future right now is moving away from servers into serverless, which is great, being able to scale. But you need to be able to monitor those. That's another big thing, as well as being able to monitor these attack vectors. And there's so much data that's coming in. So I think AI is going to play a big part in this as well. I know everybody's talking about that right now. Um, but SecOps AI is another big thing that I think that's going to come down the pipe in the next couple of years, just so that we can help manage all these alerts. In the past, there's always been a security operations center that really has taken this on, and they use SIM tools. But if you think about it, I mean, they're just ingesting raw data all the time, and then you have to have an engineer look at it, and then, okay, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Follow a run book, escalate it up to an engineer. So there's a lot of time that's involved in that, and right now, especially with all the threats that are out there, we need to be able to proactively determine if there's an actual issue, or just quickly say, nope, this is data that I know is there. And so, training new people. Right now, there's a lack of security professionals in the field. I hear that at a bunch of conferences and webinars that I go to. So this is the perfect time to get into SecOps and security.
Yeah, and just on the point of AI, I mean, have you seen anything coming up which is applicable right now? Because you're right. I mean, one of the things which we'll see in most of these security monitoring systems is just the bulk of, I mean, the huge amount of data which is coming in, and there is a real, and I think that is what happens mostly, that you miss the signal between the noise. So in that aspect, are you seeing any new tools coming up which you're using, or is there some direction which you're looking at?
Uh, I just saw a tool come out the other day, actually. I don't remember the name of it, but I think this was the first one, actual true AI SecOps. Right now, I think a lot of what everybody's working on is the machine learning aspect of it,
Mm,
just being able to correlate events correctly. And again, that's just really training the system to
mm,
understand what's real versus what's not.
mm.
So I haven't seen anything myself personally out there, but I'm always looking. So if somebody knows, let me know.
Yeah. And for sure, it's a matter of time, right? The way the technology is proceeding, it's just around the corner.
Yeah. Um, and I mean, and going back to your question again, future of SecOps with the cloud in general, um, DAST and SaaS tools, I think is another thing that needs to be incorporated into the development like life cycle. So DAST dynamic analysis security tools, which is testing your code. Um, it's kind of like a black box security testing. It doesn't have access to your source code. And then there's
Mm,
the SaaS, which is the static testing, which is done kind of white box. So it has access. So you've got the before and after. And actually, there's a new one as well. It's the IAST asked. I don't know how to say it, but that's the gray box type of thing. So you've got the beginning, during, and end. So incorporating those type of scanning tool sets in your SDLC is a good process as well.
yeah. Uh, Moving on Johnny, there's again, maybe you've mentioned parts of this, but uh, and something which you mentioned is ingenuity, and between ingenuity and security. Ingenuity usually wins given the pace at which we want and the product to be in the market. But for startups, lean startups with a smaller team, what would be these low hanging fruits to just secure the infrastructure, something which they can really take advantage of right now without worrying about much, and which they're not doing, which they should do but are not doing? What would these initial, something which you can guide them towards?
Yeah, there's a lot of things out there that people can do that I've seen. So I think the number one is security awareness training. Uh, as I
Mm,
mentioned, security is everybody's responsibility, but unfortunately, people don't know what they don't know. So incorporating some sort of annual security training at minimum, maybe starting off quarterly, just understanding phishing, smishing, spear phishing, ransomware, all that good stuff. Train on that social engineering as well. That's a big one right now. Don't click on links. Verify beforehand. I mean, even if it's as simple as just picking up the call, you get an email from somebody that says, they're in your department, but you're not 100% sure. Just call just to verify. Get that second set on there. MFA everything. I think that's a big one. Um, you know, Passwords right now are that's the number one uh, vulnerability out there is compromised passwords because of
mm,
reused passwords uh, or low complexity passwords. So making sure that you have a strong password, but at the same time enabling that MFA so you have that two factor. So if somebody does get your password in either a social engineering attack or on the dark web, they're not going to be able to do much without that second set of credentials, which is going to be a token or your phone.
mm,
And then, I mean, along with passwords is use a password manager. I we have so many passwords right now, you can't remember them all, and that goes back to reusing passwords. So, um, the nice thing about password managers is you only have to remember that one master password, which is really nice. MFA your password manager as well, because if somebody gets access to your master password, then that kind of defeats the point. So, uh, I mean, there's a bunch out there right now as well. I think everybody's kind of heard about the last pass issues right now with their. They've had a bunch of security incidents recently, but there's a bunch out there. Bitwarden, one password. Just do your research. On top of that is RBAC, role-based access control. So, a lot of things I see as well, especially with startups, is everybody gets administrative rights,
mm,
which is a pretty terrible thing, just because they have the keys to the kingdom. So, just putting some basic RBAC in place, read-only roles or development roles, power user roles, and then granting temporary administrative access as needed, with a ticket, just so you can audit it, just so if somebody ever comes back and says, oh well, so and so did this, how can we track that out? Well, I had a change ticket, or I just had a ticket in general, or an email at the point, especially for startups. I know that there's not a lot of tools out there, but just making sure
mm,
that you can track that back.
mm,
Um, Tagging all your resources. That's another big thing that I see as well, just because this is going to help. Uh, if I'm in there working on something and something spun up, I don't know what it is. I can quickly go in and look at the tags, come up with a basic tagging policies, environment owner, so we know who to reach out. Okay, this is a development box. John Smith owns it. I can reach out to him. This goes back to the configuration management piece as well. Uh, in the cloud, use security defaults. There are a lot of security defaults out there that AWS and Azure are really trying to help people with and steer them to. Enabling encryption by default, blocking public access to buckets. Those tools are there. Use them. You don't need to to go around them. And then I think the final thing is patch. Uh,
mm,
Man, I can't preach patching enough. I, they always talk about, and I don't know the exact numbers, but it's between like 60 and 85% of attacks are on unpatched software. I think I
mm.
read a statistic the other day that 1 in 4 are still uh, susceptible to the WannaCry from a couple years ago, which is a little insane to think about. So always patch your stuff. I mean, especially now with the 0 days that come out, um, and just the vulnerabilities that exist out there. So patch everything.
That is a great list actually, Johnny, and the big part is that most of it doesn't cost anything, right? It's basic, simple hygiene which you can implement and just move forward. But I would also love to get your views on this last aspect of patching, right? I mean, when people know this for decades, that right, 60%, 80% attacks are happening because of this one core reason. And even when security has taken a forefront in all communications or in a lot of communication, why does this still keep on happening that unpatched servers keep retaining the number one spot as the attack point?
I think it comes down to level of effort, especially in larger companies. You've
Mm,
got a lot of moving pieces, and especially for companies that haven't adopted the cloud or some sort of scalable solution, it's really hard to do this. I mean, there's a lot of controls in place. You know, you have to, okay, we've decided that this patch is out. All right, well, now we need to discuss with management to get the actual approval with it. Then we need to come up with a change window. You know, when can we actually take the system down? Do we need to notify our clients? So I think that's the biggest issue, and I think it goes back to communication as well, and just understanding what's actually out there.
mm,
Um, I mean, and it's funny because Microsoft alone, they have Patch Tuesday every month.
mm,
They release what's out there, and it should be pretty simple. Okay, we've got these patches that are coming out, and then just immediately, set up a process around Patch Tuesday. Okay, patches are coming out. We're going to test this in development first, make sure that it doesn't break anything. Once we verify it, let it bake in there for about a week. We're going to push it into production. We need that change window. But again, I mean, you're already 2 weeks out just
mm.
for patching your production if you're doing it the right way. But it takes time, and I can't give you an exact answer why some companies don't decide to patch. It could be that they either don't know, which goes back to using those DAST and SAS tools to actually check that you have what vulnerabilities you have. Penetration testing is another big one as well. Just
Mm.
run a pen test. I mean, there's a bunch of tools out there, free tools as well, that you can just run against your environment, and it'll quickly spit back, the top CVEs that are out there. So at its core, patching is very easy. Uh, just a lot of people aren't doing it.
Well, that remains a mystery for another time. Uh, Johnny, this has been a rapid fire overview of SecOps. But before we move on to the end, any tales from the trenches which you would like to share, near disasters, catastrophes averted, anything, any anecdote which comes to your mind regarding this whole discussion we have had?
Oh man, yeah. There's been a couple out there for sure. I think the near disaster ones really go back to uh, you know people not understanding security in general. So um, the biggest one I see a lot is opening up firewall or security group rules on specific ports, 22, 3389,
Mm,
3306, when they're testing something, and they don't they don't spend the time to try to figure out what the underlying issue is. So they're trying to connect to a server, for instance, and they can't figure it out. So they just open up port 22 to everybody, which
mm,
is a big no-no. So I do see that a lot, and um, just setting up rules to notify, like, hey, this rule exists, you should probably go take a look at it. So and again, just educating and communicating with your teams that in general, don't open these ports to the world. That's
mm.
bad. um, Stolen equipment is another big thing. A lot of people, everyone's using laptops now, and I've seen so many times of laptops being left in cars or Ubers that are all of a sudden stolen, which we'll go into using MDM solutions so that you can actually retire or wipe devices.
Mm.
But that's kind of a big one also. And then just compromised passwords is another big one. I've had issues where somebody had their password compromised just in an attack,
Mm.
and their passwords are being used. They were using personal passwords on corporate environments, and which again goes back to using MFA. If your password's compromised, if you've got MFA in place, that's going to help with that.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, we actually touched a lot of themes, and I think each one of them could be a topic in itself. But if I had to just summarize, I think security awareness, training, and communication, these are two key components which will remain even if automation comes in, AI comes in, all that stuff comes in. If there is training and if there's good communication, I believe a lot of these issues can simply be resolved, yeah, in a manner of ours.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Communication is number one in my book. You have to be able to talk to your teams and know what's going on. That's I think one of my biggest issues when I go in somewhere is not knowing what I don't know and being able to communicate with those teams,
Mhm.
uh, just to understand what's going on.
Perfect, Johnny. This, as I said, this has been a rapid fire overview of SecOps, but I hope, and I mean, one thing we really touched on, which I'm very happy we did, is that we touched different segments. So whether you are developing your startup, or I mean, you're on product dev stage, or you're actually in production and working with clients, there is stuff to be done, and that stuff need not be overly complex. Right, simple steps, MFAs, password managers, security training, tagging, configuration management, patching. Just doing the basic hygiene steps could help you a lot. And then obviously what you said, don't click on links.
Yep.
So
Yep. Don't click on links.
don't click on anything. Johnny, it's been wonderful. Thanks so much for taking the time. It's been
Yep.
wonderful having discussion with you.
It's been great being here. Thank you very much.